So, hello everyone, welcome back to another one of my streams here. So, at the moment, I do not have my headphones in the computer right now, so if I see people chatting, pinging me, or want to talk with me, you can talk to me in the chat, and I possibly might respond. I know I don't normally do these kind of streams all the time. I've been trying my best to do animations for a while, so I haven't really told anyone what's been going on with how I've been doing. So I've been basically busy with more important things than doing streams or videos, which is a decision that I have heavily made because of my computer being a butt most of the time when it comes to streams, because I have to sacrifice a ton of latency when it comes. So we're good to go on the stream. So hello to anyone. So what is our subject today? So our subject right now is something that a friend of mine, which I'm working with, even though I haven't worked on his animations in a while. So I have been working on a personal project for just me and Brandon the Brony, or Brandon the Brony Pony Productions, or Brandon for short. And anyone who asks why I'm with them, or anything like that, or what I'm doing with him, I am basically helping him with certain ideas that might flourish. But most of the projects he's been doing lately hasn't been on my part. So I have been doing my own thing. I have been practicing stuff for myself. I've been painting. You name it. Hello, Lightning Dash. To anyone who wants to ask what's going on here, this is a macro theme animation that I had possibility not an idea on. It was not really my idea, but it technically was Brandon's idea. So I took liberties in this. So he gave me some audio clips that I can use. But there was a technical problem on my end. The reason why that Ken took over my part of the project is because my computer has severely no space at all. So anytime I'm doing SFM, I have to really break down all the clips. So some of these clips are basically edited to a point. Like this is about not even closely done. So what I can tell you about this animation is that it's not fully completely animated. It's only briefly done. I basically had to do most of the technical work with camera and the video part. So I took some filters that I normally use on a regular canvas for SFM. So SFM, you have unlimited things you can do with it. So I didn't want any of my animations. I'm doing fine, Lightning Dash. So I have basically made this animation from scrap. There is some areas that I have to heavily edit. And I found out that this room that I'm using is broken. So anytime that I reload into SFM, I'm going to show you something real quick. So I'm just going to open a really simple... Let's do this again. So I'm going to just go to this cycle right here that I have. We're going to do this real quick. So what I'm going to show you real quick is loading in back into the other map, which is the same one I was using. Now, there is a time and place where animating in SFM gets very technical and very complex when you don't know what you're doing. So for people that don't know what at all I'm doing, it's just the basics of SFM, and SFM just crash. To anyone who doesn't understand why on earth that happened, it happens on me a lot because SFM takes a ton of my RAM and CPU at the same time. So it did load the project file, but it crashed because there was something that the computer couldn't identify. So sometimes if there's low space, it will sometimes, I'm going to tell you this, sometimes will crash very, very, very hard. And but just think that I'm not slurring my words here, and I'm going to get off of Discord real quick so I can let my CPU not kill itself. And I'm not showing my full screen because I want to keep that personal in a way. The only time I would ever show you guys the screen unless I'm showing information about something. So what I'm going to say right now is that I've been doing a case on the WebKit situation KP thing, but I haven't really got into a lot of it. I was just giving my part about a week or so ago, about a week or two, and I basically was sinus infection during that week too, so I sound a bit different, so I don't have any form of reason to say so. So I'm going to show you what I mean by why the map acts up. So Twilight's room map from seasons 1 through 4, which is the map that's used in most of certain blue screen and green screen effects. So I basically took liberties of editing this, and this is what it looks like when you open the map. So what happens is that when I turn off other properties, it tends to have a slight issue on my end. And this has been happening with animations on my part. And animating in SFM is not as really bad, but there are some parts of SFM where it will try to crash because it's beta still and it's not in a full production. Because SFM, if you're playing with it, now what I have learned to do with SFM, which is something that you can learn on your own, but when you're trying to do something that's very, very important, so like if you're doing a important file save, you do not put save, you put save as. Now, save used to work on my computer, my old one that I used to stream on. My first ever laptop that was a HP. It lasted for about 5 years. I had it for a long time, since 2016 and 2015. That one was difficult to deal with. Gmod is another animation software I use sometimes, but I do not know all the basics because it's a really old engine, and right now it's been updated so many times. And to the point where anytime I upload it, it takes so long to upload all my add-ons because some of the add-ons will possibly not work at all. And there's always a message saying that you need an add-on to do this. So I don't have Counter-Strike on my computer anymore. I don't have any of those essential stuff like Half-Light and Source and SDK, because most of the software used for SFM, all you need is your computer and your ability to have an account for SFM. Since SFM was in beta, there's some that sometimes when you're doing animations for Pony, here's what I think happens when you're trying to animate Pony stuff. And I'm going to increase the width of the video. So what I meant is the clip, there's the clip editor, there's the motion, and there's the graph. Now, technically, whenever hypothesis is what I'm going to say right now. Normally, whenever I start animating, I'd stay in the clip editor first before making a decision on this Twilight animation. So, I'm going to show you what I have an idea for that Brandon basically allowed me to go with. There is a lot of incomplete areas that I kind of noticed. I let those mistakes just technically slip. So I had to basically use a ruler. So in order to get the micro size pony, I had to use a internal measuring method of being sure the audio version of this versus the animation part, because animation, this computer does not like SFM's file saving system. So at the very end of this video, I did a still shot that's overhead. So it's not a moving, it's a static camera. So whenever I have a static camera, like the kind of cameras you use for live streaming and you have it statically and it's not moving, it's not making any kind of effort to emphasize emotion and the feeling of the scene or how intense it is. And I'm using what I know in film, because filmmaking was something that I did for a long time and I kind of studied for the past, I think, most of my life since I watched Twister and The Storm of the Century. So most of the time when I'm animating a scene or animating a video or cutting it out, so the flow of the video is what I focus on. And about 6 years ago, when I basically got really into SFM, it took me about close to about a couple of months to prepare in 2017 to get it to work. So I did not have any kind of skill. So I was in the 1,000 hour range and I was doing something stupid. This is when trying to back up my stuff was kind of difficult. So a lot of my old videos that some people might know me from, which is my Miss Harshwinny animation, which has over almost 6,000 views on it, close to about 8,000. That's pretty much the epitome of my old channel. And my channel has moved back and forth with niches that I know that I'm good at, which streaming is something that I do most commonly. And whenever I show people how animating works, I, for one, tell people the best way to understand SFM is to use your cheats. But you cannot cheat SFM completely, since you still have to do your own style. So whenever I'm getting a camera into a scene, like this shot had to be basically leveled with Twilight. So I don't like the idea of cameras being too zoomed in or too zoomed out. So the only thing that I'm going to say right now that's very important if you want to be sure your video is not going to look crappy or something like that is to use your flow of view. It's the sliders. The sliders is what I use in case I don't want to mess with the body parts. So I have technically only 2 cameras in this entire animation. So if you want to animate the camera, you just put existing. It's something that you can do, but I can tell you right now, this is how it looks. So there's nothing in the save debug. And debugging is just something, because it's select drag, which is the dragging and stuff. And dragging your animations or animating prompts. So SFM technically says that Twilight is technically a prop in its own universe. So basically global. So you can move Twilight anywhere you want. But whenever I'm setting up this macro video, I had to basically ask him questions. So this is how my process works with animating videos or doing films or doing anything at all, is to think about it first, figure out a plan that I can technically do, and most of the stuff that I do on the daily basis is never planned. The only one that was planned in such a short amount of time was the Miss Harshwinny animation. I took close to 6 years to get into SFM and knowing how it works. Because Gary's Mod and I think MPVs or whatever stuff, Pony Music Videos, PVM or something like that. That was kind of the stuff that I used to grow up on, because SFM didn't exist. Gary's Mod existed, but for 2 years people had to suffer through that, and they had to figure out a way how to animate. And because back then you had to use Fraps or OBS, and if not, snippets. Now, Gary's Mod does have a system where you can save your game and you don't have to lose all your data. SFM's a lot more easier on that. But when you're in Gary's Mod, you have to know the commands to set everything up, or the console commands. Now, there is something that I will tell you right now that tells me about my computer's ability to handle rendering stuff. So whenever I'm rendering this video, so if it's just a Twilight video, just a video that I normally use. So whenever I go into rendering settings, I try to keep it off the settings as possible. So if I were showing you the progress particles like this, you have the option to select and deselect. Now, this animation did kind of break on at one point some of my animations whenever I'm putting a size graph or a size scale on any props. I'm going to show you what I mean by what happens when that does that. You see here when you're trying to export or import a certain animation walk cycle, what I had an issue with is that some of the older and newer models from version 5 and 6 of Model Blender, or version 7, that's the Anthros. But the commonly most used model pack that I remember that a lot of people used for ponies like Twilight or any other of the main 6 was version 4 revamp from Nico something. It's not Nico Source Demon, it's by another Nico that designed Gary's mod for about the models that everyone knows from, because I think by the time I started getting into SFM, like doing macro theme stuff or doing videos that involve size or doing silly things, but whenever I'm taking my time on it, some of my projects can take about a year. So when you guys came into my stream a long time ago about the Luna animation, I do not have any project saves on that. So the last save that I know from is from that video I uploaded about 2 years ago, back in May of 2022, I think. I only released 2 animations in about a year, so I took 6 months and 6 months to prepare for that. Some of it was unexpected, never premiered, because I didn't feel like going through the hustle and hassle, or whatever you want to call it, through animating. And when I was doing Twilight's animation, so Twilight was an easier character to do because she's not as complex as some of the other ones where you have to figure out the physics of some of the stuff. But whenever I'm organizing SFM, so this is what my setup looks like whenever I'm animating a project that involves personal projects. But when I'm not doing a personal project, they're not in order. So my top one is camera and lights. I normally use a 5-point light or a 6-point light. So the most amount of lights that you can technically use if you were to do a video will be anywhere from 6 to 8 cameras is the max that SFM allows on default. But when I was animating Twilight, it took me about a week or 2 to start getting an idea down or getting a rough idea. Most of these videos you're seeing here are a little bit, not as good as my other videos. But I want to be a little bit okay with what I can add. So I didn't add a whole lot of shaking in this video. So I gave everything a static movement. I used all the default stuff that you normally would use in SFM. And when I was animating this, Brandon told me something that I normally don't ever do, is adding more than one character. But since it is about him and Twilight, authority figure and stuff, so I don't shame on people for liking certain things. Because what do you expect? Art is art, and people's preferences and interests are subjective as possible. So my interests are pretty narrow when it comes to animating stuff. So I'm open for interpretation when it comes to wanting to see people what they want me to see. So I ask people online on Twitter.com and Discord and sometimes Skype, which I don't use Skype anymore. I used to use it, but I stopped using it, and possibly my account is lost to time. But when I was on Discord in a private call, or whatever you want to call it, there was at one point when I had a character that had to use an animation that 2 buddies of mine that wanted me to do something that involved inflation stuff. But when it comes to cartoons and ponies and stuff, I take it very easy when it comes to trying to sort out what I can possibly do in this very moment in time. And when I was editing videos myself, so the type of editing that I use is called the jump cut editing, or the splice back and forth, so beginning and end. So there's no, out of all the stuff that I've done, there is no transition between these two. Now, At one point, SFM did crash so hard on me. It crashed so hard on me with doing SFM that I could not upload anything up in SFM for an entire month or so. And that it was about a month because it took me almost 3.5 weeks to figure out what the problem was. There was a problem with Google at one point when I was searching up for SFM where I couldn't find any of the pony models. At a time and place that I remember is that um, when I'm doing one character, it makes it easier. So whenever I pull up a character, I use the terms that they use. And the most common one that I use is just putting the character's name in or rescan. So I just click all user mods or all mods together in SFM. So I have over 100,000 plus files, small little technical files that are under the material labels. And the compression that most of these models make, so for Twilight, she has such a basic setup here. So whenever you're doing other stuff, let's say if you want to rig it, I have plenty of rigging involved with SFM, so SFM is not as complex as you might think when you're playing around with it. It took me about 5,000 hours, if not 18,000 hours, since I began a lot earlier in 2012 and 2013 with getting ideas down how to play around with SFM. The SFM community for My Little Pony really boomed around the same time that Fridays at Freddy's and Undertale were happening. And there was a lot of funny stuff that people did in SFM, but SFM, think of it as a movie maker, but it's for 3D animations. So there's a little trick I love to use for setting up scenes. So I use the thing called splicing and stuff, which is cutting out and cutting in. So if I don't want a scene in a video, so let's say if I just want to slice it, so I use just the B for blade. And to be kind of funny, some of my animations do take about a year to complete because of life and personal stuff, and even though that's kind of excuse, I love doing this stuff. But whenever I'm making perfection, because anytime that I look at my old work, I love that I improved very heavily on in just 6 years. But when it comes to juggling with life and animating, which is something that is called escapism, but whenever I'm doing my own animating skills in SFM, I have as many skills as you can get. So I kind of a little bit know how to use material overlays. So you override it. It's called materials. It says add materials override. So this is what I use for SFM. So I use Xfombos and Expungeboos, or Xfon sponge, or alpha for invisibility. So I only use just the 0, a 1, or 2, or 3 if I want to make it invisible and extremely transparent, like a balloon or an inflatable. But when I'm basically making a video like this, I can give you a rundown on how long it took to do each scene. So setup is kind of a little bit of it's self-explanatory. It's basically where you're setting up a scene. So if people have a big project they want to get out of their way in SFM, I hope you are prepared for doing a ton of stuff that involves constant physical labor, putting everything into place. So whenever I have an alicorn or a regular pony or humans, I have to set things up in a way like a movie studio would, or a production or a casting team, or a set designer or a prop. So there's a bunch of props in SFM that I use. I have, like I said, thousands. That's because there's a lot of packs that I have used that involves personal things, in some cases, people's OCs. Now, not every OC that I got in here, so sometimes SFM likes to be a little funny with my characters that I love playing around with. So there was at one point, let me see where it's at, that I can tell you what happened. So when I was animating this scene for Twilight to do this, both the tail and hair on the head basically just jigged, is what I call it, jittering and stuff. And I figured out the reason why that happened was because when the walk animation was being put on her, it thought it was it basically gave a command to where it said to move the hair out of the way, and because it's on default for the walk cycle, it doesn't really have the same thing. But there's a really neat little tool that I use in case I make mistakes. The undo button in Control Z means delete or undo. But when you're doing an animation like this, it takes anywhere from about 50 hours if I were to complete a 1 minute animation, because I'm just giving you a rundown on smaller projects. Can take between, if there's just a minute long, I did some stuff in about 6 to 7 hours. That's about 2 hours less than a workday. So I spend the next 2 hours pondering over the idea of setting up a story in a way. And normally, everything to me is just so straightforward with animating. It's just like you take a process. So my process is brainstorming. And whenever I'm brainstorming, I tend to always figure out what I can possibly do with the animation. So these little bars right here is the widescreen edition. So that's a cinematic bars on the screen, so it's kind of small. If you're watching it right now, you might see it's a little tiny bit different when it comes to moving the thing. So it looks kind of wide, then it looks like a square, then everything here seems extremely basic. So I didn't label the effects. So I can use sound effects, overlay effects, material overlay effects is what I use whenever I'm setting up the clip editor. So I have to blade like 10-second segments. So if I were to take that scene into 3 separate angles, I have to stop the camera, stop the animation, and set everything up. So what I do if I want in case to keep it from happening is going into the motion editor and do this. So it gives me an idea what motions are happening. So if I click any of these, this is just the movement of the character, the walk cycle, the up and down regions where they animated it. So if I were animating a walk cycle, I have to go for the process of reference. So not plagiarizing. So some people that I see, which is myself included, and I cannot deny it, sometimes I love to use the walk cycle over and over again and never change it and just leave the same one on, because I don't like the idea of making my own one, because I kind of know how long it will take me because I have to use reference. And there's another trick that I love to use when it comes to the M-Log or Notepad, or numpad is what it's called, number pad. Right in the middle of this one on my gaming keyboard, I use the different arrows to help me jump. So sometimes if I were to hold it, it'll look like this, and I might pick it up, but there's these little pause, record, back and forward fast, or skip. So you could skip scenes in this. So I'm being sure that she's animated correctly. So I didn't really put a whole lot of jiggling on her hair because there's a lot of properties that I have to deal with. And you can do that by just moving the ball, the rotating ball, which is this. This is what is called a rotating ball to help you with posing and stuff and being able to not use this one, which is another screen, is what this is called. Then transfer, then click and point. So the very last one, or the very first one of the entire lineup, is something that you just click on and you move it. But these animations do not have an IK rig where they all connect. So Twilight is not connected to any key rigging like you normally would do if you were animating characters' limbs and their ability to smoothly move back and forth or moving in different directions. So there's also the thing called blurring the animation, where you take the motion blur that you normally use in movies in animation, or a squash blur to make them look like they're moving. And it's kind of a little cheat that some animation studios use to this day when it comes to 3D animation, which is warping. But I don't use that method because it feels extremely uncanny. And when it comes to light, let's go right here. So if you could tell right here that the lighting is in basic mode, and there's only just a couple of lights helping with the shadows, but it's pretty flat. So when you have a flat scene that's for My Little Pony, you're going to have some issues with getting the light right, or just trying to figure out where would the light be at. So the light source in this animation is all around. So it's like the cartoon show. There's no light anywhere unless it's during the nighttime. But going back on track, so when I start animating, I go in the graph editor or the motion editor for Keepshake, or I can go to clip editor to skip scenes that I don't want. So I can go to the camera and take it and do something like that. You put a bookmark to save your last motion. So I don't have anything in the background for Twilight to use, or being able to accommodate her big, huge no wall. So there were some tricks that on my sleeve that I do when it comes to just animating ponies. And like I said, it can take up between a couple hours to a couple 100,000 minutes of, not 100,000, just 1,000 plus minutes of non-stop stuff. Or just really, altogether, I can be spending so many hours on one particular scene, because the giant Luna Growth one that I did took about 960 plus hours, if not 950 hours of non-stop tweaking. And I became the most notoriously when it comes to animating, it's notoriously known that I tend to overuse a ton of stuff, or overgoing a lot of technical stuff and making it too complex to build. So the animation for Luna was very, very difficult to accomplish, and it took me an entire year to get it done with, until near the end of the year, where I had to release it because it was the only thing left on my bucket list to get out. So there's a thing I like to do with projects like this. This is a project that's in development, and it's very rough, and you can tell already that it's in rough condition, and it took me forever to somewhat figure out why it happens. But when it comes to animating, it's not as hard as you think it is, unless you know how physics work. Like, if something's heavy, it has a thud to it, or the invisibility of heaviness. But when I'm really focused on a particular task when it comes to animating an SFM, I tend to look at it. Like, right now, I'm analyzing what I should do. So I'm thinking of moving the camera just a tad bit more close to Twilight's hooves, or a little bit more straightforward where it comes out. But the background is completely still open, so I still have to put a green screen in it. Or a mask, or a chroma key mask. But SFM's kind of wonky when it does that, because it doesn't like the wonkiness in SFM. But I'm going to excuse myself for a moment. Okay, where was I? Yes. I was at the part when I was trying to say what else I can do here. Just a little bit tired here. Don't worry about it. Okay. A little bit of a heavy sigh there. So, what I'm trying to do right now when it comes to perceiving and perspective. So, I love shots in SFM that have a meaning. So, I kind of do a cinematic walk, which is focusing on from the rear to the top of the shoulders and stuff. And I use different little techniques when it comes to animating just these. So if I don't want objects, I just tell it to disappear by clicking entities display, or just other entities and particles. The bones are just the bones inside the computer itself for the program. And sometimes when there's an issue on my end with SFM, I remember at one point while doing the Luna animation that I did about 2 years ago, it took me a long time to realize that the animation took so long to do that I never really fully completed it, because there was a little method that a YouTuber I'm not going to name that gave me an idea to stay with the idea that you have and not move on until it's completed. Some projects I have two major projects. This one, Brandon, and one more that is technically a bonus, which is my personal animation of Fluttershy's growth, which was something that I was working on during the Christmas season of 2022 through 2023. I took 3 weeks of nonstop setting up. So I took a while to set up all of the stuff that involves props in the background, props for them. And when I did my first one in 2017, there was no plan for it. I just basically straightforwardly went through 10 plus hours straight in order to get through everything. But I do not have that type of energy to waste on. I, for one, do not like wasting any of my time with people when it comes to telling them that it would take me a while and I am still getting ideas down. They're always in my head more than they're on paper, because I don't like the idea of writing everything. And when it comes to just doing animations and writing something, so I don't normally write scripts, storyboards, or any of that. I just overlook stuff. So I'm more of the idealist and being able to get a vision going for. So I technically have a vision for this animation right now, which is just doing a comic recap or a comic idea. But comics are kind of somewhat a little bit more easier when it comes to SFM, because you have a little bit more control and it's just static video and stuff. And with that in case, when you're loading up a model that's new, you have to search up. So this Twilight one is just I think it's a revamp. It's a revamp Twilight Sparkle 1. I have two separate ones because there are two different types. There's the revamp and VN or version 4, which is from that person that's Namoy, whatever their name is, Nico something. But when you're editing in SFM, you have to save all your progress all the time. So I technically have to keep saving the same project 1,000 times because I don't like the idea of crashing and not saving. But I can definitely say that this animation possibly took about 3 days to roughly do it. And people love it. They love how I did this because I use a lot of my skill level and using a technique that I use size difference and perspective. And what I had to do in order to get all that to work is to look at comics that have ponies in it as macros. Stuff that's by NC Mayers, Goat Train, and Possibility, sometimes Diz, and Station Master 1984 and 1985. So I use that method when it comes to making proportions different, being able to figure out what idea that is already festering. But when it comes to Twilight, she's a pretty simple one because of the purple hair and the purple not purple eyes, but kind of red, kind of whatever color it is, magenta, whatever. But when it comes to the lighting, you have to sometimes play around with the light in order to get it to work. So there's the 3 point, the 4 point, the 5 point, the 6 point, and the 8 point. My Applejack animation was also a 6 point or a 2 point lighting because I was doing it in the outside, so everything was bright. So that's the norm for Equestria to have. But moving on. So sometimes if I want to go through a scene, I can just drag it back and forth. I can fast forward it because I don't want to mess up. So if I were to look at this scene right here is completely just a cycle of her standing. That's another cycle of her looking. And I had to edit her head a little bit. So I took the liberty of setting up elaborate scenes. So I'm looking up, kind of close, kind of far away, kind of wide. But that's just how I work. So I don't like it when SFM has issues with me getting an idea down or me doing it because it's more of my fault whenever I'm trying to get ideas down and get a clear idea what it comes from, because people say you don't have to do that all the time. You can just, what writers do and what people that have ideas figure out. I don't just figure out stuff. I don't like doing that kind of method. I really like the ideas that SFM is a really unique software to play around with. If you don't want to waste your time learning Blender, Maya, or Unity, or even Unreal Engine. Since SFM has the Python console and JavaScript is what also people say too, or even because JavaScript's pretty old. It's Flash stuff, so it's kind of vulnerable when you try to use it. So it's better to use a third party when it comes to using it. So some people like to use a GIF animation not in TF2, but for My Little Pony videos. They use GIFs like memes. But for me, it takes a little bit of time to get an idea running. So another animation that I was working on that I can show you, that took a little bit of time to work with. But at the moment, I'm not seeing something that I want to show because I know most of my animations are not always the safe for work stuff, because most of the stuff I do is like very extreme when it comes to not safe for work, because I don't like the idea of showing that, because I know people in stream might be underage or something like that. People might be lying about their age. But moving on from that political tangent, or just something that I normally do. But when you're playing around in SFM, like, I love the idea of using Twilight for these scenes because she works very well with what I'm wanting to. So when Brandon in my DM told me about this, I got the idea. I basically sketched it out in my head, and I asked him, "What do you want to do?" And he told me just add stuff that might work for the scene, or just try to get it out. Because the problem that I have with deadlines is that when you're on a deadline, you don't really have the most best quality when it comes to animating stuff. So if I had just a day or two of animating, you wouldn't get more than 5 to 10 seconds of animation put together in about 6-7 hours. Which I don't have that kind of time to spare. Which I do know how to spare my time with viewers. But I think that's enough rambling with me. But I think what I'm going to do right now, since I've already told you what's been happening with me lately, I think what I might do, because I'm really tired right now, because I never thought I was going to be this tired tonight. I might have to get off right now because it's getting close to 11, so I'm going to get off, and I'm going to try to continue the rest of it maybe tomorrow, the day after. And my mouth's a little bit dry because I'm really just tired. But I'm going to get going and have a nice night. And if you have any questions, just, you guys already know the drill for most people is to comment or DM me stuff or ask me for questions that you might want to provide. Then I can possibly nicely answer them quickly. So I'm going to get off for tonight. Have a nice night.